This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour and welcome to Unique Scotland, the go-to podcast on all things Scottish. And I'm delighted to have you with me on the second part of a tour of a wonderful part of Scotland that you'll find on the coast just to the east of Edinburgh, and that is East Lothian. This county has a beautiful coastline, and we'll be visiting some of the exquisite towns and villages along this coast as we tour the area, and I'll let you into the secret of my wee hidden gems that I enjoy as I drive through this area. Well, as I broadcast this, it's now the middle of November and we've just had our first snow. And Storm Bert is forecast to bring heavy wind, rain and snow in the coming days. So I'm just pleased that I'm hunkered down at home. Today I'm recording this East Lothian episode 2 from my home in Aberlady. We're going to start where we left off in episode 1, having just left the town of Direlton, with a view of Berwick Law up ahead on the right hand side. More of that later, but we'll head into North Berwick and take the coast road down to Dunbar with an amazing sculpture nearby called Dunbear, a 15-foot brown bear. Well, what's it doing there? We'll then return to Edinburgh via East Fortune to see the extraordinary Museum of Flight, and then on to the village where the Scottish flag, the Saltire, was born. We'll then pop into the lovely market town of Haddington with its gorgeous shops and cafés before having a look at the village of Gifford, a real gem of a village. To see some great photos of East Lothian, then have a look at my website, exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk, or on my Facebook page or Instagram, and do leave a review if you like these offerings. There are short videos of East Lothian on my YouTube channel, Exclusive Scottish Visits, so have a look at some of those and let you see where my travels take me. Well, wherever you are in the world, I would now like to relax and join me on this second episode of a tour of the east coast of Edinburgh, East Lothian. Well, we've just left Direlton and I'm looking up ahead into the distance and I can see a conical shaped hill called Berwick Law, and I'll tell you about this hill when we get to North Berwick. We're driving along the A198 and I'm always impressed as I enter the town from the west. There's a long tree-lined avenue with large, beautifully built Georgian houses left and right, taking you right into the centre of the town. Driving straight on down Beach Road, you pass on your left-hand side a wide open green space and the North Berwick Links Golf Club. Another one, I hear you say, yes, well, East Lothian is a golfing mecca, and yet it has so much more to offer. Beyond the green and out to sea, you'll notice the island of Craigleith, one of the 4 chain of islands off the coast, which includes Fidra and the Bass Rock, all of which are volcanic plugs, or lava domes, which seem to litter this part of Scotland. North Berwick is a pretty town of around 8,000 inhabitants, with 2 lovely beaches called East and West Beach, and a picturesque harbour. As early as the 8th century, there was a ferry which crossed from here to Fife, probably to Earl's Ferry, to serve the pilgrims who were making their way to St Andrews to visit the shrine of Scotland's patron saint. The name Berwick has a number of possible beginnings. In Old Norse, for example, wick tends to mean a bay, and this would make sense, although in Old English the word means barley homestead, which could refer to a simple farm that was here well before any town grew up. We do know that it was called North Berwick because a town further south called Berwick-upon-Tweed used to be called South Berwick, so to ensure there was no confusion, locals placed North in front of their name. There is archaeological evidence of occupation in this area from around 3,000 years ago from Iron Age burial kists that have been found. Coming forward to the 12th century, a castle was built on a natural mound to the east of the town, but sadly nothing remains of this structure today. As for the modern-day town, the high street is where to head for shopping and get a feel for the type of independent shops that one used to find in every small town before the out-of-town shopping malls took over. My grandkids' favourite is the Sugar Mountain, where traditional sweets in colour jars provide all the sweets, or candy in American talk, that we used to know and love ourselves as children. The cafés seem to produce the freshest coffee with scrumptious homemade cakes, and I wonder if it's the fresh sea air which gives you a holiday feeling that improves the taste and a sense of well-being when you're there. I have to say I had lunch recently at the Puffin Bistro, and I can highly recommend this delightful eatery with its lovely fresh produce. To give you an idea as to what else you should see in modern-day North Berwick, I have a few favourites, and the first is the Seabird Centre, which I've been to a number of times with my grandchildren. But before I tell you about it, I'd like you to note a small old church building on the left as you approach the Seabird Centre. Yes, I know I'm digressing slightly, but stay with me here. This is fascinating. And the small building is St Andrew's Auld Kirk, or Old Church. And I just have to say something about this before we go look at seabirds. The Auld Kirk is notorious for its connection with a number of people of the town being accused and convicted of witchcraft in the 17th century. These so-called witches are believed to have held their covens in the Auld Kirk Green, where it was said they danced with the devil on Halloween night, which is most appropriate because I'm releasing this podcast so soon after Halloween. Anyway, over 70 people were accused, tried, convicted and executed, often burned at the stake, having first been half strangled. And one of the most famous witch trials at North Berwick was that of Agnes Sampson. It was said that she made a potion to bring about a storm in the North Sea, just as King James VI of Scotland was sailing home from Denmark with his new wife, Anne of Denmark. The trial, which took place in 1591, was actually attended by the king, where Agnes Sampson was found guilty. Of course, she'd been tortured to confess. Then she was burnt at the stake. So don't pass this tiny building without popping inside and maybe just giving a thought to those poor wretches who were brutally tortured and then barbarically executed. Well, if you now walk 100 yards beyond the church, you come to the Seabird Centre, and what a super place to visit, especially with children. Upstairs there's a shop and an excellent cafe with fabulous views out to the Bass Rock, a volcanic plug which is about a mile off the North Berwick shore. There are the ruins of a chapel and an old castle on the rock, which played host to many prisoners down the centuries, including members of my own clan Mackay, but I'll tell you more about that shortly. Returning to the Seabird Centre, it is spectacular, and it allows you to get up close and personal to the wildlife on the Bass Rock in their downstairs interactive gallery, where there's much to learn about the bird and marine life in the area. The coolest thing for kids, and of course for adults, to enjoy is the television screens with real-time video relays of the birds at rest and play. There are some cameras strategically placed on the rock, and it's a delight to watch all of these species up close in their natural habitat, nesting, feeding their young, and of course fighting for space on this packed island. The Seabird Centre is a must-visit when you're in North Berwick. Looking a little more closely at the Bass Rock, there is the possibility of taking a boat ride around the rock to get a close-up of the thousands of seabirds that pack this tiny island. You will notice that it appears white from a distance, and this is all the guano produced by the birds. The Bass Rock, or as it's known locally, the Bass, is about 1 mile offshore. It really is quite a sight, and you can't miss it, as this steep-sided volcanic plug rises to a height of over 350 feet, or around 105 metres. And this volcanic island is made of phonolitic igneous rock of Carboniferous age, which makes it around 350 million years old. 350 million years old. Igneous rock formed through the cooling and solidification of magma or lava, and you'll all know that magma remains within the crater of a volcano, and lava is that same magma, but it's flowing out of the chamber as lava. Anyway, it's a wonderful site off the coast of North Berwick, and it's home to a hugely significant seabird sanctuary, and specifically to around 150,000 gannets, and that's the largest colony of gannets anywhere in the world. The rock is now uninhabited and is a site of special scientific interest. But it wasn't always uninhabited. In fact, it was occupied in the 7th century as a retreat for early Christians, with St Baldred having a chapel there in around 600 AD. Well, fast forward to the 1500s, and a castle was built and occupied by the Lauders of Bass. Then in the 1650s, when UK became a republic, yes, we were short of a monarch for about 10 years when Charles I was executed by beheading. Oliver Cromwell used it as a prison. It continued to be used as a prison in the 17th century to hold Covenanters, and in the 18th century to hold Jacobites. And it's fascinating to read about this period of its history, especially as it held some of my own clan, the Mackays. But I have to stop there, otherwise I'll be down another rabbit hole. It was still being occupied by Sir Hugh Dalrymple of North Berwick in the early 1700s, and the ruin today is in quite good condition. What you will notice immediately as you approach the Bass is the 66-foot tall lighthouse, constructed in 1902 by Charles and David Stevenson, and they were cousins to our famous Robert Louis Stevenson, who actually mentions the Bass Rock in his book Catriona. Well, enough of the Bass, and as we leave the museum, we walk along the seafront, Melbourne Road, and 10 minutes later turn up School Road to find the library and the Coastal Communities Museum. It's a great wee museum covering a number of historic villages of East Lothian, including Direlton, Gullen, Aberlady and Whitekirk. It closes at the end of October for the winter, but I was pleased to see that there are some events and talks being held in the local church, St Andrew's Blackadder Church, throughout this period. From the museum you can walk back down to Marine Parade and enjoy a long walk along East Bay Beach. Probably time to get yourself and the kids an ice cream and enjoy a stroll. If you look away from the sea, towards the town and south as the compass will tell you, then the small hill that is visible from most of the surrounding area is known as Berwick Law. I mentioned it as we were driving across from Direlton. It's a conical hill and is effectively a volcanic plug rising to around 600 feet. If you look up the Scots word law, the definition is actually a conical hill that rises conspicuously from the surrounding landscape. So it certainly fits the description. And if you look closely at the top of the hill, you will see a whale's jawbone standing proud at the top. I was always intrigued by this when I used to visit North Berwick as a boy. As it turns out, there's been a whale jawbone here since 1709, although the present one is a replica of the original. Due to safety concerns, a fiberglass jawbone was airlifted into place in 2005 to ensure this iconic landmark has remained. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that North Berwick was a whaling station, but it is known for whales to be washed ashore around this coast. At the foot of the hill there's a car park, and there's a path that runs all the way to the top. It's a relatively easy climb, and the round trip will take about an hour. At the top you'll find the remains of an Iron Age hill fort and some ruins of later military buildings. But the real reason for the climb is to enjoy the amazing views from the top, which are superb, and where on a clear day you can see all the way up the Firth of Forth, the county of Fife across the river, and the wonderful countryside to the south. Well, we must depart this lovely town and head east and south towards Dunbar. Before we get to this final place on our East Lothian tour, and still on the A198, around 10 minutes after leaving North Berwick, we come to a small car park on the left-hand side, and there's a couple of low-lying buildings with a sign saying The Drift Cafe. This is a Seacliff cafe called Drift, and what a lovely wee gem it is. I've mentioned the lovely coastal walks around East Lothian's cliff tops. Well, it was while walking on this cliff edge on a wet and windy day in 2018 that Stuart and Joe McNichol had an epiphany and realised on this particular spot they'd found the perfect location for a dream cafe. Now, you'd expect to find shipping containers at sea, but on this cliff-top location, you'll find them being upcycled and used as the core of a wonderful little eatery with one end replaced by panoramic windows, giving excellent views right out onto the Bass Rock and the North Sea beyond. Well, they started out with a coffee and cake service, but that has expanded with a bistro-style lunch and with seasonal Scottish produce at the heart of their menus. And if you don't believe me how good it is, they've won awards from Visit Scotland and Lothian and Borders Food Tourism. And what a view from here. Anyway, after delicious coffee and cake or a wee bite of lunch, leave the car park and turn left onto the main road again, but don't go too far because just up ahead, about 3 or 4 minutes away, there's a signpost to the fabulous cliff-top castle called Tantallon. It's well signposted on the road, and you turn immediately into a car park on the left-hand side. Tantallon Castle has stood here since the mid-14th century and is an extremely imposing structure with a huge red sandstone wall confronting you as you approach the castle. It's almost 50 feet high and 12 feet thick and protects the entry to the front because the other 3 sides of the castle are built on the cliff edge of a promontory upon which the castle sits. So natural defences on the other 3 sides. There are towers at either side of this wall and a defensive gatehouse tower in the centre, with a drawbridge allowing entry over a deep ditch. The castle was in the hands of the powerful Douglas family up until about 1699, when it was sold to Lord North Berwick, Hugh Dalrymple. Now, I normally major on medieval history of castles in Scotland that I refer to, but in this case, I was intrigued to learn that Tantallon played a not insignificant part in the Second World War, and that was during the preparation for the invasion of Normandy, to relieve Europe from the tyranny of Hitler. It was a few weeks before D-Day in June 1944 when some German early warning radars were installed in the castle. These early warning radars had been captured from the Germans who were defending the coast of France. Well, once installed in Tantallon Castle, Royal Air Force bombers flew up and down the coast of North Berwick and Dunbar, dropping thousands of aluminium foil strips to simulate ship contacts on these radar screens. Now, tin foil is very reflective, so on a radar screen it looks like a solid contact. Well, when these aluminium foil strips were dropped in certain patterns, they appeared to show a large number of contacts, which makes the radar operator think that there are a large number of ships approaching. Ingenious. And on the night of the 5th and 6th of June in 1944, at the beginning of the Normandy landings, these bombers dropped their aluminium strips near Calais, far from Normandy, making the Germans believe that this is where the invasion was going to take place. You can just imagine the German radar operators looking at their screens and seeing hundreds of contacts, making them believe that a huge fleet was on its way, and reporting this to high command. This was just one part of a massive deception plan, and you may recall the film The Man Who Never Was. And it all worked, as the Germans retained some of their best tank divisions near to Calais, creating a path for the Allied armies to charge into Normandy. So this mighty castle of Tantallon, a medieval stronghold of the 1500s, played its part in a world war some 500 years later. Today, Tantallon is in the care of Historic Environment Scotland. It's a great visit, noting how the castle and this Douglas family were intertwined with great events in Scottish history. And if you've got children with you, then there's loads of places within the castle to investigate, and you can while away 1 or 2 hours in this superb historic site. When you leave the wonderful Tantallon Castle, get back on the A198 towards Dunbar, and we'll be passing through the tiny settlement of Tyningham. But before you get there, you might want to turn off to the left towards Tyningham Beach, which is a real hidden gem and not often visited, as it's not signposted. You drive down a narrow road called Lime Trees Walk for about a mile, and then you have to park up to take a short walk down to the beach. It's another of the wonderful beaches of East Lothian. Once you've been to the beach, get back on the A198 heading south, and you come to a junction where you turn left and head to Dunbar. About a mile along the road, and before you arrive in Dunbar, on the left-hand side you will see a sign for adventure park called Fox Lake Adventures. Now, if you are fit enough or your children would like to do something other than play on a fabulous beach, then a visit to Fox Lake is something to consider. I've only just discovered it myself and I'm truly impressed. It's billed as offering unique and exhilarating adrenaline-filled outdoor activities, which include the UK's first ropes course over water. There's wakeboarding, ringos, sedgeways, open water swimming and an aqua park. Just to digress for a moment, I have to say that I have water skied in the past when I was serving in the Royal Navy, on board a destroyer, operating in the Mediterranean. On very calm days, the ship would stop and we'd use our fast boats to give some respite from work by towing water skiers behind them. In those days, youthful exuberance meant that I would give anything a go. So my first water skiing adventure was being towed behind a small, fast, rigid, inflatable boat from a warship. It was wonderful on a balmy, sunny day in the middle of the Mediterranean, although we did have a shark safety boat which included a sailor with a gun on hand in the case of hungry sharks looking for a tasty sailor to devour. Yes, it was a truly exhilarating experience, although I do recall being dragged head first through the water more than standing up on the skis. Such lovely memories. Anyway, after Fox Lake, we eventually arrive at Dunbar some 5 minutes later, having turned onto the A1087 road. It's actually called the Edinburgh Road and will take you into the town centre. It's not a large town, got a population of around 10,000. It contains the villages of Belhaven and West Barnes, and for those beer drinkers out there, you'll recognise the Belhaven name, as this is where the famous Belhaven beer is brewed. Belhaven is well known locally for its glorious sandy beach, and to get to it, you have to cross the iron Belhaven Bridge over the Beal Water. It's known as the Bridge to Nowhere. At low tide, you can use the bridge to get to the beach, but at high tide, the bridge is completely cut off and looks like it's floating on the water. An extraordinary sight and fun at the same time. Just make sure you get your times of high and low water correct, otherwise you'll be stranded here for a few hours. Dunbar is reputedly the sunniest place in Scotland, and today a popular visitor destination with its rugged coastline, beautiful beaches and expansive countryside. Historically, the town belonged to the northern county of England, Northumbria, until 1018, when it was ceded to the Scots. Dunbar has always been a bit of a stronghold in its strategic position at the mouth to the Forth estuary, and there has, since earliest times, always been some sort of fortification of the town, and the medieval fort ruins at Victoria Harbour are still visible today. When you arrive at the High Street, you'll find a mix of buildings, from medieval to more modern. Now, if you turn left down the High Street, you are treated to the site of the late 18th century Lauderdale House, as well as the birthplace of John Muir, the famous Scottish-American naturalist, and more of him shortly. If you turn right, there's an old townhouse or toll booth dating from 1550, with its reconstructed Merca cross outside. Coming to Lauderdale House first, it's an interesting story because originally it was a private house and then a barracks. When it was first built in 1730 by the Fall family, it was called Dunbar House, but when they got into financial difficulties in 1788, they sold it to James Maitland, 8th Earl of Lauderdale. Thus it became known as Lauderdale House. Robert Adam, that famous Scottish architect, was commissioned to enlarge the building, which he did. If you're on the High Street looking at the building, you will see a large red sandstone house within 3 sections. The 2 end sections are pedimented, and the central block has a sculpture of a winged sphinx at the top. However, if you go round the other side, you will see how much the Adam brothers changed the design, as the frontage is now covered in dressed ashlar, and the centre has a rounded portico with 4 tall Ionic columns. It's a lovely building and would have been a sumptuous private house. In 1855, the War Office acquired Lauderdale House and developed it into an army barracks, and it remained in Ministry of Defence hands until 1955. Today, there are 27 private homes within this exquisite development. Heading back up the High Street, at number 126, you will see a 3-storey house with some flags outside and some signs showing that this is the birthplace of Dunbar's famous son, John Muir. He was born here on the 21st of April, 1838. He was always inquisitive and had a deep love of the natural world, and some of his earliest boyhood memories are of taking walks with his grandfather in the countryside and along the East Lothian coastal paths. In 1849, when the boy was only 11 years old, the Muir family emigrated to America and settled in Portage, Wisconsin. I can't really do justice in this short podcast to the amazing achievements of this extraordinary man and the effect that he had on the American wilderness, but during his lifetime he published over 300 articles and 12 books, so for more information you'll have to do a bit more research. However, he co-founded the Sierra Club, which helped establish a number of national parks after he died, and today the club has over 2.5 million members. He's been called the patron saint of the American wilderness and its archetypal free spirit. His interest was not only in protecting wild spaces and to have some designated as national parks, but he believed in man and nature living together in a harmony that even now we are coming to recognise as the only way forward to save our planet. Today he's lauded as a pioneer of the modern conservation movement, and it's great to see that his birthplace has been preserved. And I'm just pleased to report that in honour of this great outdoors person, Scotland has developed a John Muir Way, or a walk in his honour. And it's a route across Scotland, some 134 miles long, and goes from Dunbar, through Edinburgh, across the central belt of Scotland, to the town of Helensburgh, my previous hometown before moving across to the east coast. This museum is a must, especially if you come from the USA, so I strongly recommend you get down to Dunbar and pop in to see John Muir's birthplace, the man responsible for the creation of America's national parks. As we continue up the High Street, just before you get to the old toll booth, on the left-hand side there's a statue of John Muir, which is a romanticised Peter Pan-like statue with birds above his head. It was the work of Ukrainian artist Valentin Ivanovich Znoba, although a more impressive statue in memory of the great man is about 5 minutes' drive away, sitting on the main A1 road, and it's called Dunbear. And it's a 5-metre high steel bear sculpted by renowned Scottish artist Andy Scott, the man behind the Kelpies and other well-loved sculptures. This remarkable sculpture is on a mound planted with wildflowers and was unveiled in 2019, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it when we drive out of town. Within the town there's a wonderful park now called the John Muir Country Park, and it features grassland, pine woodland and a wide golden sandy beach. Thank you, John Muir, for your inspiration from which we now benefit. Well, before I go off on another tangent, I just want to mention the toll booth or townhouse on the High Street, behind the John Muir statue. You can't miss it, as it has a medieval air with a protruding tower with sundials, clock faces and a witch's hat-looking spire at the centre of the building. It's white harling or stucco on the outside. This toll booth was built around 1595, and as I've mentioned before in other podcasts, toll booths were the places to pay tolls on entry to the town. They could be the local government building, as well as a courtroom and a jail. The frontage is asymmetrical, with 3 bays facing the High Street, and the central bay has a sort of semi-octagonal tower projecting forward from the bays either side, and is topped by a spire. It has long since tried its last prisoner, and in much of the 20th century it served as a local government building. More recently, a local history museum has been established, and the museum and gallery on the ground floor have changing historical and art exhibitions, as well as a local history display area. It's open during winter months on a Saturday afternoon, so do pop in if you're in town. And for a quick refreshment, I usually go into the Gray's Coffee and Chocolate House just down the main street from the townhouse. Dunbar has a waterfront and 3 distinct harbours. 2 of these, the Old Harbour and Broadhaven, date from around 1574, and the third, known as the New Harbour or Victoria Harbour, dates from 1842. You'll also find the old Dunbar Castle at the harbour, which played its part in Scottish history. So, leaving Dunbar, you continue through the town on the A1087 until you come to Spot, and that's S-P-O-T-T, Spot Road, where we'll be turning right to get back onto the A1. And as you turn right, you will see on your left-hand side a handsome Victorian building with bay windows and a mixture of red and yellow sandstone. And there's a date stone on the side showing 1902. This is the Dunbear Hotel, which opened in 1902, initially as the Albert Temperance Hotel. Well, fast forward to 2024, and this beautiful building has been turned into an award-winning family hotel. It's retained many of its internal features, such as grand oak staircase, ornate plasterwork, and Art Nouveau fireplaces. I was attracted initially to lunching there because of a recent award it had won, and it's dog-friendly. Can't go anywhere without our spaniel Minnie. I was joined by my sister Margaret and brother-in-law Richard, and the real reason for mentioning this fine place is that Margaret's a bit picky when it comes to eating out, and at the end of the lunch she was so delighted with the meal that we've now added it to our list of places to go. When we first popped in, and just before lunch, I caught up with owner and proprietor Phil Miller, who was a bit taken aback when I asked for a few words for my podcast. Well, I'm delighted to say he obliged.
Well, I'm delighted to be in the Dunbear Hotel in Dunbar, and I'm with Phil Miller. And Philip, how nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, John. Welcome to Dunbar, to East Lothian, and to the sunniest place in Scotland.
I've heard that. It's absolutely marvellous. And how long have you been here yourself?
We've been here 10 years. In fact, it's our 10-year opening anniversary this November. So, exciting times moving forward.
And you're always in the hotel trade, were you?
Yeah, I think I was dropped on my head in it at birth, so done it from a very young age, worked for some large multiples, Hilton, Menzies Hotels, operations director, and then we decided to go it alone and do it ourselves.
Fantastic, and I do know Dunbar. I know this place was pretty run down about 10 years ago. What have you done to it yourself?
We opened it as a closed wreck. It had been shut for 2 years, had more water coming into it than was keeping out of it. Totally refurbished it, reopened it. And then in 2022, well, obviously COVID hit, and that wiped out any event business we had. So we have converted our event room into a large restaurant, which is where we're standing now. 5 more bedrooms, that takes us to a capacity of 24 bedrooms. And earlier in the year, we were proud to be awarded an AA Rosette 3-star silver hotel, the only one.
Fantastic. In the area. I'm actually looking at, that's one of your plates up there, which shows the AA Rosette. Wonderful. 24 bedrooms, you say?
Yes.
And what sort of clients, where are they coming from?
All over the world. The Americans have returned this year in some strength. Before that, Europeans, Spanish, French. We looked after a vintage car group. They came in with the old-fashioned Citroens, including a 2CV dressed up like the one James Bond had.
Yeah.
But we have clientele, golfing, walking, big corporate clientele from the power station, tarmac. We work very closely with Belhaven.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know there's 5 wedding venues in Dunbar, all needing accommodation. So very busy during the summer and throughout the year.
And you now run it just with your wife, is that right?
We do, yes. It's a family business. My son joined us as well. So he started last year. So he's started out front. He decided he wants to work on the dark side in the kitchens. He's doing very, very well. Is my daughter, who's too young at the moment, is watching in envy as he gets a pay packet and she just gets pocket money.
Yes, and who will be cooking for us today?
It'll be Daryl, our head chef, along with the rest of his team. So they're excited to look after you. And we've got quite a busy lunch, but a very busy evening, which is the norm for us now. Which is we're very lucky and built up that reputation over the last 18 months that we reopened the restaurant.
Thanks, Phil. That's been absolutely super. I'm very much looking forward to having lunch here myself. And this is Phil from Dunbear Hotel saying bye for now. All the very best.
Bye for now, and look forward to seeing anyone soon.
Well, thank you to Phil and Leslie and all the team at Dunbear Hotel for your excellent hospitality and for a lovely lunch that day. So, if you're looking for a sumptuous lunch or dinner in the Dunbar area, then the Dunbear Hotel is highly recommended, and it also provides super accommodation as well. Continuing along Spot Road, and at the end on the left-hand side you will see the Dunbar Garden Centre, a great place to while away an hour or so looking for that perfect plant and perhaps grab a cup of coffee into the bargain. From the car park there's access to the wonderful statue of a 5-metre high steel sculpture of a brown bear standing on its hind legs. This is the famous Dunbear, another of sculptor Andy Scott's masterpieces. It actually forms the centrepiece of Dunbear Park, a proposed low-carbon, mixed-use development. The brown bear was actually chosen to symbolise the role that John Muir played in establishing national parks in the USA, which included Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. And according to Andy Scott, the Dunbear, and I quote, is a symbol of the wilderness that John Muir worked so tirelessly to protect, and Andy hopes that Dunbear Park will provide an opportunity to enlighten people about this man and his work. So there, you have just been enlightened. I have to say, I love the fact that local schools were involved in the naming of the sculpture. The STV News live feed reported that the final name was chosen from almost 3,000 entries by designer Scott and stakeholders from Hall Hill Development who commissioned the piece. Emily Hotchkiss, a 5th-year student at Dunbar Grammar School in East Lothian, won the competition to name the 5-metre structure. Well done, Emily. What a great idea for the name, which of course is a lovely play on words with the town of Dunbar. Dunbear, Dunbar. Brilliant. Well, we turn right at the junction with the A1 road and head back to Edinburgh. I'll be taking a couple of turns off the road to point out some of East Lothian's other hidden treasures, and the first is the very pretty village of East Linton, which we arrive at some 10 minutes later. East Linton is a small village of around 1,000 inhabitants. It used to be called Linton, and the name probably comes from the Lynn, which is a local waterfall. It was later renamed East Linton, as there's a small town called West Linton in Peeblesshire, and that's just to save any confusion. It's a delight to drive through with numerous red sandstone built houses and narrow lanes giving it a medieval feel. The bridge you drive over coming into the village actually dates from around 1560 and crosses the River Tyne. In the centre of the village, in the square, you'll find a fountain, and it's shaped like a large cast iron basin with scalloped edges, supporting a lamp standard with 3 arms. And beneath the scalloped basin are 4 child figures holding vases from which water flows. There's a plaque on the side of the fountain which reads, "Presented to the Borough of East Linton by John Drysdale, Esquire, Buenos Aires, 1882. And why, I hear you say, is someone associated with Buenos Aires gifting a fountain to this wee village? Well, John Drysdale came from East Linton and eventually emigrated to Buenos Aires, where he became a successful businessman. And how lovely that he never forgot his village. Driving through the village and down Preston Road, you will arrive at Preston Mill, which is an Outlander connection, and more of that shortly. You will pass a beautiful old church called Preston Kirk, and I mention it because the original church was founded by Baldred of Tyningham in the 6th century. That was the priest that I mentioned earlier as Baldred of the Bass. The present tower dates from 1631, with enhancements to the church in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and you can tell how old the church is by the ancient graveyard surrounding it. Just along the road from the church you'll find a right turning into the car park of Preston Mill, a beautiful old water mill dating back to the 18th century. The mill's an odd cone-shaped building with a red pine tile roof sloping steeply to the ground. It's still in working condition and is a great place to visit. The National Trust for Scotland volunteers working at the mill are most welcoming and happy to explain the workings of the mill and its history. For Outlander fans, this is a must-visit film location, where the mill is meant to be on Jamie Fraser's land near Castle Lallybroch. In the series, he's in the water fixing the wheel when some redcoats come by and stop to talk to Claire and the other ladies, and Jamie has to hide in the water until they've gone. And you'll recognise it immediately on your visit, and you can see photographs on my website and Facebook pages. And please, if you do visit, don't do what one of my clients did and get too close to the water wheel for the perfect photograph and fell into the water. Stay safe, please. On leaving the village, head away from the A1 onto the B1377 and follow the road round until you come to East Fortune's National Museum of Flight, which is set in an old disused Royal Air Force base, which was used as a fighter station during the First World War and later used as a night fighter training unit during the Second World War. I remember as a boy building plastic Airfix airplane kits, and I also recall building a Beaufighter, which specialised in night fighting with its inbuilt radar system. I have to tell you that as a naval officer, I do smile when I think that this base predates the formation of the Royal Air Force, which only came into being in 1918. Originally, it was the base for the Royal Naval Air Service, but I must put service rivalry aside, especially as a good friend and colleague of mine, Wing Commander Jeff Farish, might be listening to this podcast. And I'd be happy to hear from any RAF personnel who served at this fine air station, or even Fleet Air Arm personnel, and contact me through my email john@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. The museum itself is housed in the original wartime buildings of RAF East Fortune, using the hangars, control tower and storerooms to house the historic aircraft. Aircraft collections started as long ago as 1909, when the then Royal Scottish Museum received a Percy Pilcher's Hawk glider, the first aircraft in any museum collection in the United Kingdom. Many other aircraft followed, and in 1971 the museum was gifted a Spitfire by the Ministry of Defence. And as it couldn't be displayed in Edinburgh, it was stored in a hangar at East Fortune. Well, with more aircraft being gifted, it was decided to open a museum of flight at East Fortune, and public were admitted for the first time in 1975. The collections continued to grow, and it was exciting for some to witness the arrival of donated aircraft actually flying into the airfield and into the museum. Aircraft such as the de Havilland Comet, but more excitingly an Avro Vulcan bomber arrived in 1984. I mean, this beast of an aircraft screaming overhead turned a few heads in the locality, I can tell you. Now, the Vulcan bomber had been the backbone of the United Kingdom's airborne nuclear deterrent during much of the Cold War, until it was superseded by the Royal Navy's Polaris nuclear submarine fleet, which were less susceptible to detection and interception by the enemy. The Vulcan actually took part in a conventional bombing mission called Operation Black Buck during the Falklands War with Argentina in 1982. Once again, I'd love to hear from any RAF veterans who took part in that operation. Amazingly, in one hangar you have an actual Concorde aircraft which arrived in 2004 after an epic journey from London, up the River Thames, by barge, past the Houses of Parliament, then by sea to Dunbar, where it was finally transported to its present home. And you get to see inside this iconic aircraft. Now, I've flown in many military aircraft, both helicopters and fighter jet, but this was special. Well, I could go on, as there's much more to see in an engineering wing and a space for hands-on activities for children and adults. A place to really get lost in, so go visit, you will not be disappointed. Getting back on the road, we're heading to Haddington, but before we do, there's a turning off to the right to the small village of Athelstaneford. The signpost actually says the Flag Heritage Centre and the Saltire Trail. Now, that should give you a clue that we're talking about the Scottish flag, or the Saltire as it's called, a lovely white St Andrew's cross on a blue background. Legend states that Athelstaneford is where the original Scottish flag was first adopted. It refers to a battle between the Picts and the Northumbrians in 832 AD. It's stated that the Pictish king Angus II had a vision where St Andrew promised him victory in the forthcoming battle. The following day, just before the battle, the Picts saw clouds in the sky which had formed a white cross in the shape of the cross upon which St Andrew was crucified. In other words, an X shape, and they took this as a sign. They went on to a famous victory, and this white cloud cross on a blue sky background was adopted as the flag of Scotland. The leader of the retreating army, whose name was Athelstane, was killed at a local river crossing or a ford, thus the name of the Athelstaneford for this settlement. The present village is really quaint with a long line of red sandstone and white painted cottages and red pantile roofs leading all the way up to the local church where you'll find the Athelstaneford Heritage Centre. You see the sign just inside the churchyard showing the birthplace of Scotland's flag. The centre is actually at the back of the church and occupies a small building which was an old ducat or dovecot. That's effectively a pigeon loft built originally in 1583 and would have provided pigeons for the dining table of the local laird. This ducat is one of the earliest surviving Scottish examples from the 16th century, and I was delighted to discover that the son of the builder George Hepburn, Sir John Hepburn, was the founder and first colonel of the Royal Scots Regiment, the oldest infantry regiment of the line in the British Army. Last month I attended the Royal Scots Regimental Dinner in Edinburgh because one of my previous ships, HMS Edinburgh, was affiliated to the Royal Scots Regiment, and I was pleased to discover this connection. Anyway, the Athelstaneford Heritage Centre, another hidden gem for you to visit. We leave the village, and as you drive back to Edinburgh on the A1, just as you're approaching Haddington, on the left-hand side you'll see a small hill which has a bit of a whale shape. This is Traprain Law, a hill of around 500 feet, and you'll see the wider front side gouged out by modern quarrying. It was clearly an important high point, and there's archaeological evidence of occupation from 4,000 years ago. Some excavations have turned up some fascinating finds dating back to the 1st century AD, and the most important is a huge Roman silver hoard, the largest from anywhere outside the Roman Empire, and this has become known as the Traprain Law treasure. Most objects were cut to pieces and only some were left intact. Most of the find was table silver, but there were Roman coins and also early Christian items. You can now view these wonderful silver artefacts in the National Museum of Scotland. Now, when the Romans occupied southern Britain and occasionally ventured across Hadrian's Wall into what is now called Scotland, they wrote down what they saw, and on top of Traprain Law they recorded that the Votadini tribe controlled this hill and the surrounding settlements. The Votadini eventually abandoned this hill in favour of Din Eden, or the Fort of Eden, which of course is the volcanic plug upon which sits Edinburgh Castle, or Edinburgh Castle. Now, we'll be visiting Glasgow on our next Unique Scotland tour, and I love the legend connecting this hill and the birth of Glasgow. It was from Traprain Law that King Loth's daughter, Thanaw, was thrown when he discovered she was pregnant. She survived and was eventually taken in by St. Serph's community in Couros across the River Forth. Thanaw went on to produce a son who would go on to establish Glasgow as the famed St. Kentigern, or St. Mungo as he's known locally, and I'll be telling you all about this in my next podcast, so more later. Our next town on the left, off the A1, is Haddington, a royal borough and the main administrative centre for East Lothian. It received its borough status, which meant it could trade with other towns and also abroad in the 12th century during the reign of David I, and from these small beginnings it became an important and busy market town. Being located on the banks of the River Tyne, it was once famous for its mills. It developed into the 4th largest town in Scotland during the Middle Ages, and later was at the centre of the mid-18th century Scottish agricultural revolution. Today, it's a relatively small town with a population of around 10,000 people. It still retains its historic street plan with Court Street, High Street, Market Street and Hardgate, all making up the border of the original open triangular medieval marketplace, with a central island of buildings developed from the 16th century onwards on the site of the market stalls. Now, as you drive in from the west side, the road forks at the beginning of this central island with a building towering over the junction. This is Haddington Town House, completed in 1745, based on a plan by William Adam, one of the famous Adam family of architects. It used to house the markets on the ground floor and an assembly hall on the first floor. A spire was added in 1831, giving it the impression of a church. Well, before you arrive at this junction, on the right-hand side you'll see the Corn Exchange, built in 1854 and now used as a venue for concerts and theatre, and alongside is the County Courthouse, now used to house East Lothian's council offices. I'm actually looking forward to going to the Corn Exchange in a couple of weeks' time because I'm taking my family to see Charles Dickens' classic Christmas story, Christmas Carol. Haddington has a good variety of shops for such a small town, and this is where I find most of what I need for weekly shops, living only 10 minutes from the town. I love the small market town feel, and I enjoy visiting the cafes such as the Loft Cafe and Bakery, found on Peffer's Place, just behind the old Corn Exchange. It is indeed a loft in an old listed building, but there's also a charming outside seating area in an enclosed courtyard below. The food is home-baked and delicious. It's one of my favourite venues for a coffee and a cake in the morning after shopping, and it's great to bump into my big sister Margaret occasionally when she's in town. There's a super cafe on the high street called Carlisle House Cafe Restaurant. Carlisle House is an important classical building and is a 1708 Queen Anne terraced house and was lived in between 1834 and 1881 by the historian, social writer, ethical thinker and the powerful public speaker Thomas Carlyle. The cafe has an air of 19th century living in an informal atmosphere where delicious food served by very attentive staff. As the county town of East Lothian, Haddington is the seat of East Lothian Council, and they've named the building John Muir House in honour of this great man from Dunbar. The town centre is home to a wide range of independent retailers, including a bookshop, sports shop, a saddlery and country goods specialists, 2 butchers, a hardware shop, cookware shop and several gift shops, and I love to pop into the wee shop called Expressions for my greeting and birthday cards. Haddington's also home to the offices of the local newspaper, the East Lothian Courier. And on the last Saturday of the month, a street market is held in Court Street, and you'll find the best and freshest local produce from local vendors to local farms who have brought their produce directly from the farm. Just lovely. If you're interested in local history, then you must visit John Gray Centre in Lodge Street. Now, John Gray was a local minister whose bequest of books and money in 1717 gave the town one of the earliest community libraries in Scotland. The building, an original historic granary, has been fully restored and now houses a museum of East Lothian as well as a library, local history collections and a reading room. It's a great facility and you can wander around at your leisure. If you drive to the Nungate area of the town, you'll see St Mary's Church, the longest church in Scotland, a lovely red sandstone building which was started in 1375 and consecrated in 1410. It was partially destroyed during the 1548 siege of Haddington that followed the rough wooing of Henry VIII, and you remember Henry's desire for his son to marry Mary Queen of Scots, and how upset he became when the Scottish nobles refused. Well, the church was restored in 1970 and it's something to behold both inside and out. Well, at this point I'd normally be heading back to Edinburgh, but before we head north, it's a really good idea to head south for 10 minutes and visit the wee village of Gifford. The village lies in the parish of Yester, and I mention this because many local names refer to Yester, which comes from Sir Hugo de Gifford of Yester. It was his grandson, Hugh de Gifford, who built Yester Castle, the ruins of which can still be seen in Yester Wood. Gifford has a market cross built in 1780 and is still standing in the centre of the village. There's a town hall, which was originally an early 18th century private house, which was later extended and then partially rebuilt. You can't miss it. It's a magnificent red sandstone building with a clock tower and an impressive staircase leading up to the front door. Sorry, that was Minnie barking in the background. Anyway, just along the road from the town hall is the church known as Yester Parish Church, and it's a beautiful harled or stuccoed white painted building with a square tower and cone-shaped steeple, and it was constructed in the early 1700s. And talking of the clergy, my American listeners will be interested to know that Reverend John Witherspoon was born in Gifford Manse, and that's the house attached to the church for the minister. He was born in 1723, the son of Reverend James Alexander Witherspoon, the local minister. Now, some will immediately recognise the name, but if not, John Witherspoon emigrated to America and became a major leader of the Presbyterian Church. He was the only clergyman to sign the United States Declaration of Independence. Well, the village has a school, several shops and 2 hotels, and I've occasionally popped into the Lanterne Rouge Cafe for a lunch stop on some of my tours. It's a lovely little coffee shop with fresh coffee, homemade bakes and breakfast rolls. And the cafe is really intriguing. It's named after the award given to the last place cyclist in the Tour de France, effectively referencing how a red lantern, or lanterne rouge in French, used to hang on the back of a passenger train. I love it. Well, just outside the village is Yester Farm, which is run by a husband and wife team, Simon and Jackie McCreary. I was met with a lovely Irish accent when I spoke with Simon recently, and he explained how his 350 cows are cared for and how all their products are handmade in the traditional way on this family farm. And I'm just looking at the menu, which ranges from cottage cheeses, sour cream, creme fraiche, Greek-style yoghurts, mozzarella blocks, and that is just a start. Now, visits to this farm must be pre-arranged, and I know that local schools have visited to see the wonderfully cared for cows and to see how the milk is processed into these wonderful products. It's lovely to have such a facility on the doorstep here in East Lothian. Well, thank you Simon and Jackie at Yester Farm in Gifford. Oh, and thank you to Leslie Sutherland, who works there, for letting me know about this gem of a farm. Just one final place to mention in Gifford is a self-catering accommodation venue with a complete difference. It's called the Bus Stop and is only 5 minutes outside Gifford. I noticed it had won Thistle Awards and just had to pop down to see for myself what all the fuss was about. Well, the Bus Stop is definitely a holiday experience with a difference. What they've done is beautifully recycled and restored and handcrafted buses for their accommodation. I'll put some photos up on the website, but it's a genius idea, and I have to say the accommodation is really super. And the setting couldn't be better on a working farm with beautiful panoramic views of the Lammermuir Hills in this stunning part of East Lothian countryside. Well, we've covered a lot of ground over these 2 episodes on East Lothian, and I think I've done it justice, but there's still so much more to explore and see for yourself, so make a date with this area when you're visiting Scotland. In my next podcast, we will be visiting the city of Glasgow. Much larger but much younger than Edinburgh, you might be surprised to hear. We will discover its medieval past, with visits to the 12th century cathedral and some of the magnificent surrounding buildings. But where has the rest of the medieval city gone? Most of the rest of Glasgow dates from the 19th century onwards, and even some of these amazing 19th century facades are fronting what is an extremely modern building behind. Some of the extraordinarily huge mansions which have been converted to galleries or banks were built by extremely rich men in the late 1700s and early 1800s. So where did that wealth come from? And why was Glasgow given the prestigious title of Second City of the Empire? There's an intriguing story to tell, and I look forward to sharing it with you on my next podcast on Glasgow. Well, as always, I thoroughly enjoyed bringing a part of Scotland to you. I always welcome feedback, so if you wish to comment on any of the areas we've visited today, or if you wish me to cover any aspect of Scottish life, then please get in touch through the contact page on my website or send an email to info@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. I'm also delighted to have heard from many of you who have listened to the podcasts, and it's always great to meet some of you personally. Keep your messages of support coming, and don't forget, if you do intend visiting Scotland without a formal guide, then perhaps one of my bespoke itineraries may help you plan a more spectacular holiday. A couple of mentions from people with dogs. There's Peter from Montreal, who listens to my podcast while walking his dog, Bozo. I love the name Peter. And he dreams of visiting Scotland. And a big shout out to Olivia and her spaniel from Devon, who listen to my podcast while travelling the North Coast 500. Peter and Olivia, thank you for taking the time to write. And my spaniel, Minnie, sends her love. And thank you so much to those of you who bought me a coffee. And if you wish to contribute in a small way to these podcasts, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Unique Scotland. All contributions are much appreciated. Or just share these Unique Scotland podcasts with friends and family, even better. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you all listening today, and I would now like to sign off in traditional Scottish fashion by raising my glass with a wee dram to you, wherever you are in the world. Slàinte.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.